Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for being here. This is a webinar hosted by the Specialty Coffee Association, the Sustainability Center. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer. My name is Kim Elena Ionescu, and today we're going to be talking about coffee farm profitability, which is one of the key focal areas for the Sustainability Center and the Specialty Coffee Association, its members, the industry community more broadly. This has been the case for the past couple of years. It's been one of our primary issues. But in October of 2017, we hosted our first sustainability event in Guatemala, and that really raised the raised the profile of this issue and the importance of it to everyone who attended and beyond that. And in conjunction with that event, we released a literature review, a report on farm profitability based on studies that had been done around the world. And that report raised a lot of interesting questions. It's sparked a lot of ongoing conversations. And today we're continuing that conversation in this webinar with a panel of presenters who have different experiences to bring to bear on this, different perspectives. And hopefully that will generate a lively discussion. That's the idea here. So I'm going to hand the mic to the moderator, Vera, and she will introduce the panelists and start off with some questions. Meanwhile, for all of you who are listening, there's a function in your GoToWebinar chat mode where you can raise your hand. I'll be monitoring raised hands, and also you can submit your questions directly. So I will wait for breaks in the conversation to put those questions to the moderator and panelists. Don't get upset or worried if I don't do it immediately, but please do engage in this, because this is a dialogue for all of you as well. So with that, Vera?
Yes, good morning to everybody from cold Mexico City. I want to give a big welcome to and thank you to the panelists that are joining with us today. Is Alex Geller, Aleko Chingunis, and Edie Baker. They will be joining us and being part of this first webinar on farm profitability. A big for us as this group of volunteers on this topic. For us, it has been a really great opportunity to be much more engaged in this conversation and bringing these people into this conversation, because part of it is that this topic is becoming much more of a momentum. A couple of initiatives aside from the Advance event of the SCA in October in Guatemala, it has also been a topic for example, the World Producer Forum that was being hosted in July in Medellin. And this topic is primarily becoming an issue because what we're seeing in the day-to-day work that we do, directly or indirectly, that it is becoming a bit apparent that it's not economically viable anymore for quite a group of smallholders and farmers to sustain their families from coffee as a business. So we want to engage with these people in order to talk about this topic and see if we're able to show examples where we see that it is possible still, but also understand better this pressing issue. So briefly, I want to ask Edie, first of all, can you please present yourself briefly and share with us what your core business is?
My husband, Andy, and I started a coffee house in 2008 in Sacramento, California. And after a couple years, we had joined the SCA and took a Roasters Guild trip to Guatemala. And that's where we learned all about the farming and the processing and got to meet many producers. And then we came back and bought a roaster and started roasting. And once we felt the quality was good enough to bring in the cafe, we did. And then we added roasters to our name. So we're Chocolate Fish Coffee Roasters. Now we have many wholesale customers, many relationships with producers in Central America and South America, and getting ready to open up a third cafe this year.
Okay, thank you so much, Edie. Aleko.
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and president of Red Fox Coffee Merchants. We're a small coffee sourcing and development company, green coffee development, based out of Berkeley, California. Our mantra is to work in the harder to reach communities. Our main focus is in South America and East Africa. We want to develop these coffees and create a pipeline for producers to the marketplace, and giving them a voice while giving access to smaller roasters to some of the great coffees, as well as medium to larger roasters and even part of the trade that we source coffee for.
Okay. Alex.
Hello, everybody. I'm a coffee grower here in Guatemala. I also roast coffee for the local market. Our farm is organic. It's a family farm. I've been working there since 1993, along with my brother and our dad. And I've also participated at Ana Cafe, which is the Growers Association, and as well as Fun Cafe, which is the foundation for social development in coffee areas.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that. So for Alex, we have invited you as you're also a farmer. And I think it starts from there also this discussion and this talk on the issue that we're seeing. And I think your perspective comes in here as the need that we are seeing to find a solution that works for everybody. So basically, how can we assure that stable coffee supply and as well assure that stable and profitable income for farmers? Alex, in that sense, the SCA commissioned a report, and this report was published last year, end of last year, as Kim mentioned. One of the things that was kind of a whole issue was the fact that the report said, increased yields will not automatically lead to that increased income for a particular type of farmers. So how do you see that?
Every farm is different, and even sections within a particular farm are different as well. First of all, you have to have very good data and administration of that data within each farm, in order to determine which area is better and which one is not so productive. And you have to ask yourself if the good areas are subsidizing the bad areas. So that's maybe one part of the answer. And the second part of the answer is overhead. I would have liked this study to consider more the aspect of overhead of the producer. And as a producer, you have to live, you have a family, you have to pay for school, for food, for health, and from a variable cost point of view, I see where this study was going, but there are all of these overheads that need to be taken into consideration, and productivity definitely has an effect on all of these overheads. Same with machinery, with vehicles, accountants, whatever. All of that needs to be diluted, and so I think this study needs to go deeper into that. But there is a limit where productivity creates more rentability. There is definitely a sweet spot it's very important to reach that sweet spot of productivity in order to reach rentability. And then when you go past that, rentability starts to decrease. So I agree with that aspect. And then you have to also consider the type of farm and the type of producer, and the capabilities and the things that are available to the producer, the know-how. So not each system is going to be applicable in every case. So I think that's an aspect that is very important to take into consideration as well.
Thank you for that, Alex. So Aleko, when you mentioned also the harder to reach farmers, as well as what Alex mentioned, you know, the different type of farmers that were taken into consideration to the study, each impact has a different effect. How have you seen that working in these different type of regions, and what kind of business model has worked with let's say with your supply chain?
We tend to work with smaller producer associations, whether it's Colombia, Peru, maybe larger groups in Africa. We found that in our case, because we are a small buyer by comparison to the vast majority of the trade, we want to select, and this is a process that can take years, producers that we think are on our same wavelength, meaning that they're willing to put in the effort to produce quality, and then we try to incentivize them monetarily, to be honest, and offer them different price premiums for different levels of quality to pay the better price in each of these communities. We've started to try to understand as best we can the cost of production at the producer level, which I think is a fundamental issue that we overlook as an industry at large, and try to pay something better than that. I think if we're not giving an opportunity to give producers the opportunity to climb that ladder of upward mobility, there really is no reality to them producing. So if we can get them to succeed the first year or the second year in delivering the quality that we need and then receive the premiums, then we're able to build something consistently from there and move from one farm into the neighbor's farms, and then maybe over the ridge into the next valley, and start to do something that has more of a real impact, at least in these isolated communities.
If I may add,
sure.
If I may add something towards what Aleko said, in our case, our farm, and as well as many of the other farms that we are connected with, the idea is to be productive. Coffee demands a lot of labor. A lot of people need to be involved in order to produce coffee. And if your philosophy is not one of productivity, or I'm not talking about an exaggerated level of productivity, but there has to be a level of productivity and of quality. You cannot project. If your projection is going to be one of decreasing costs in order to be more efficient, then that's definitely going to have an impact on the people that collaborate in coffee production, and that's going to create also instability. So we ourselves are replanting with new varietals that we believe adapt to rust and the climatic variability that we're having. And we're doing it at the areas that we believe are most efficient at the farm. And again, this is also to make work at the farm and most productive for the farm and for the worker, so that the whole system works more efficiently. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Alex. Edie, how does your model work basically when it comes to purchasing coffee? Can you explain us more about your business?
Well, we're still quite small in comparison. And it all started, like I said, with the trip to Guatemala, where we met a producer who the roaster we were using had a relationship with him. And so once we started roasting, we loved his coffee so much, we continued that relationship, and eventually yearly would go to the farm and learn more about growing and producing. And then one day he said, when you come down, I want to talk to you. And we all sat down, and he wanted to build a mill and expand his nursery and build a patio and take more control over the quality of the coffee. So for him to be able to do that, we had to make a decision to support him. So we agreed on a price for 3 years, which has now turned into a little bit more. And every year he would be able to create this mill. He has a wet mill and patios, and then he added on drying beds. His nursery was increased like triple fold. And now he's at the point where at 5 years down the track, we've talked again and set another price for a couple years. And now he's helping the community around him, and he is able to mill other people's coffees and help them have higher quality, which in turn would increase their income, because we're all going to pay a bit more for great tasting coffee. And then we've continued to do that in other countries. And by visiting yearly, you create these relationships where you really do rely on the fact that the coffee you agreed upon is what you do receive. And you take that responsibility when you make these relationships that you're going to support them for more than just 1 year. And in some years, some farmers' quality wasn't as good as previous years, but we don't stop supporting them. We just communicate what our customers would like, and they can make changes, and we continue with our relationship. And it's great
One of
to
the
see.
things that, go ahead.
Well, it's great to see, like when we first started, I just thought we were a coffee house, and then we went to Origin and met all these producers, and you see the community and you see the impact that you are able to have on them. So our whole goal is making coffee accessible. So by educating our customers and getting them to understand what's happening at the farm, we all are able to have an impact, hopefully, on the communities that are producing coffee. And we take that very seriously and want everyone to know that. And that's why they need to understand that, so they will pay the prices, so it will travel all the way back to the origin countries.
So thank you so much for that, Edie. One of the things that often in this discussion on farm profitability is also the topic, and Alec also mentioned it, is cost of production. And when it comes to production, there's often also the inclination to say there's not that much out there. It's very difficult to measure. That comes also out of the study, because all these different type of farmers, as both Alex and Aleco mentioned. Alex, for you in this case, you have your farm. How do you of course assume that you manage your cost of production in that sense? Have you been hearing more of the buyer request of, share me your cost of production, or how are you managing the record keeping of your cost of production per hectare? Can you share a bit more about that?
We definitely have discussions about that with some of our buyers, not with all of them. Some are more interested in those topics than others. I think the more passionate the coffee buyer is about the coffee itself, and the more passionate the coffee roaster and buyer is about putting a great cup of coffee out there, I think that buyer or roaster wants to know what it takes to put the best possible thing out there, and that person is going to be more interested and open to talk about costs and to learn about it. Then there are other buyers that are more preoccupied about being able to compete in a market out there, and so they are interested in what is happening and everything, but they have to, in the end, make a decision as to how they're going to be able to compete. And with those people, it's a little bit more difficult to speak about these things. But in the end, we try to find people, buyers, roasters who are very passionate about the cup quality, about the cup, and we invite them to the farm. We invite them to see what we're doing. We invite them to cup all the different varietals that we're planting, different fertilization techniques and things that we're using, different fermentation techniques that we're using, and we're trying to have a dialogue with them as to what they like, what they don't like, and where they see a potential in what we're doing. We try to determine if they're excited about a certain coffee, and that also motivates us to go forward, because we see they're excited about it, and they're willing to buy it in a longer term, or whether they're not that excited about it. So in those cases, we either leave those varietals or practices that we're doing. So for us, having that dialogue is very, very important, and it also opens our eyes on the other side, on the roaster side, as to what they're going through and what they need in order to compete. So it also helps us to put our feet on the ground as to what we can expect.
Okay. There's something that's also correlated to this whole topic, and I think it's more visible in this specialty coffee industry, and also with the models that you guys are producing, selling, and buying. Aleko, you mentioned that price premium is, of course, one of the angles that you have in your business model. You reward farmers for the quality of their coffee. I also know that your company has executed an impact assessment. What have you learned from this business mechanisms that you have created, rewarding producers more for the quality of coffee? What kind of impact does it have, aside from only, having more income for their farmers?
So we finished our first ever impact report after the year. Chad Trevick helped us with that, which was really, really great. And we used a community that I've been buying coffee from for the last 12 years in Insa, Colombia, in Cauca. A community that I feel very comfortable with, and a group of about 50 to 60 farmers that we've been buying from for most of those 12 years, because we felt like we could get some real data from that group. And what we learned was really surprising in a way. I mean, I've always known that we've paid the best price, but I don't really know what that means. Is paying the best price in the area really enough? Like, what's actually happening there? What's the tangible benefit to the community of just paying the best price? And we got to understand a little bit more about their productions, and more importantly, their take on their experience with Red Fox and myself buying coffee prior to Red Fox. And I say surprising because I thought we would get mixed results. I thought we would get some people that were very interested in and content with what's been happening the last handful of years, and others who are not, and thought there would be a little bit more contention than there was. Basically, what we learned was that more than 90% of our 50 to 60 producers felt like they were making enough premium to reinvest in their farm and into their total infrastructure. They knew what the proper steps were to produce great quality, whether it was picking ripe cherry, slower drying on raised beds, proper inputs during the course of the year on their farms. We also learned, interestingly enough, that the majority of these farmers were born between 1971 and 1980, and that their children were already invested in working in the farm, and that there is a coming generation of coffee producers in this country, in this community, excuse me, which is contrary to a lot of the data, which I know is accurate, but contrary to what we hear from most of the reports coming out of the industry right now. So I guess trimming the fat off of all of that, if we do create the incentive and we do show reward and we do live up to our word, I think there actually is a reality to the future of coffee production in some of these communities where it seems to be a little bit more abysmal than we might think.
And how do you, because often people then, the next question is, okay, so this is great news. You reward them, it has a positive impact in this particular community with this particular group of farmers. How are you then aiming for that reward actually to be compensated back in the next part of the chain? So how do you, mm-hmm.
So in the case of this group, we negotiate a price with the farmers directly. So for example, this group in INSA, Colombia, we're paying between 1.3 and 1.6 million pesos per carga. The local price from Nespresso, which is better than the local price from the cooperativa, is 900,000. So we know we're significantly higher. The association takes 100,000 pesos per carga, which is, a carga is 125 kilos, and the rest goes back to the farmer. So we know exactly what's going back into the pockets of the producer in these places. I'm sorry if that's what you meant.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you differentiate it when you sell it to your roasters, clients? Is it purely based on quality?
It's interesting, the niche that we live in as a business, we can talk about those things all we want, and they are important to the bulk of our client base, but quality sells, and that's it, period. So we know that we're paying more and that we're going to sell at a higher price than all of our competition, save one or two. But if the quality is not there, we can't sell, which is why the onus is on development of the product, less about conveying the story, which for us is okay. We want to break the certification syndrome, to be honest. I'm not sure if that's appropriate for an SCA
we have no restrictions at the moment. Yeah. And do you share your impact mission from Red Fox onto your roasters? Do they use those messages to perhaps their roasteries or cafeterias?
We only have 1 year of information from one group. So when we feel like we have some actual critical mass, we'll put that out there. So I think about 12 months from now, we'll disseminate the first report to our clients. But for now, it's a learning process.
Okay, interesting. So in Edie, in that sense, that about that positive impact that Aleco has been monitoring with this assessment, you mentioned also there the effect of that relationship with your suppliers, which is often sometimes underestimated, I believe, because that's quite an investment that either the buyer makes or the roaster makes in order to maintain that. What other elements of your model has been, from your perspective, a success?
I think right now the biggest goal is, well, in America, I don't think our consumers are educated as much as they should be. You can go to other countries where the consumers will pay more for coffee. But in America, we've had commodity coffee for so long that people don't really understand the difference. So we're always trying to teach our consumers through our baristas and through printed material about the quality of coffee, which means good tasting coffee. And like it was just mentioned by Aleko, there's no certifications that talk about quality and taste. So it's up to us to educate everyone. Once our consumers start demanding more from every single coffee roaster and coffee house they go to, the quality will come up in America. But I think we have a long way to go with that. I think telling the stories of the producers, it's important to some of our customers, and we'd like it to be important to more of our customers. You know, we try to explain how every cup of coffee we sell has a huge impact across the world and how they're helping people in another country by paying more. So our big thing is education. Our consumers need to be more educated and expect great tasting coffee from everybody. And what a beautiful world we'll live in then.
Mm-hmm. So so in that sense, you have a direct contact with consumers, basically, which is of course that question that we often ask ourselves: Are consumers willing to pay more for better quality coffee? And as you mentioned, that education plays a big role in that sense. What is your experience in that? When they ask about the coffee, do you see that that willingness been growing?
Oh, I think it is. I think the more they learn, the better it is. And talking about taste in coffee is so important because there's so many people out there that say coffee tastes like coffee, but high quality, great tasting coffee has so many amazing flavors. So teaching people the difference there helps them realize there is quality coffee and it is worth paying more for. I mean, it's the same when we all, you know, drank wine out of a box, or we all had, you know, the same old beer. Our consumers got more educated and realized if they wanted a better tasting wine or a better tasting beer, they did have to pay more. And it's the same with coffee.
Mm-hmm. Alex, so we have been hearing here from two different parts of the chain, and Aleko being the one buying the green coffee, interacting with the community, Edie as well. And at the end of the day, she then actually serves it to consumers. In that sense, this positive trend of consumers also being part of this topic that we're discussing, you know, if we are educated more, we're willing to appreciate the product more, we're willing to pay more. We're talking also about, you know, Aleko saying, you know, if we are also paying more, they can also invest again in their farms. So the correlation here is that price premiums can justify those farmer investments, especially when it comes to that cup quality. How is that for you? How do you maintain your positivism in all of this and continue investing again in producing coffee?
Sometimes it's very hard to tell you the truth. It's not always easy, and but the only thing where you can find answers is by communicating with people and by discussing the variables that are out there and that you need to overcome in order to make this work. And the only way is by talking with the people that are in the chain, the buyers, the importers, the roasters, the consumers, and you have to have a dialogue with them and tell them what you're going through and what you need in order to be successful in this. And then you have to make a very honest evaluation about the coffee that you're able to put out there and see if there is a demand for it and if people really like it enough so that they're able to pay accordingly for it. And so For me, it's very important that we have good cuppers out there, people who can appreciate these wonderful coffees and who can explain better to consumers what's going on and what it takes to produce these wonderful coffees. And the more passionate and knowledgeable people we have involved, I think it's going to be better for the whole chain, and it's going to make the chain more transparent and more strong. So I like this direct contact because it gives me a sense of what I can expect. It helps me to plan, and yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Reviewing a bit of the question of people sending questions in, and I'm gonna pick one out in case this is related a bit to the conversation we're just having right now, and it's related to the buying actually of the coffee, where a question is of one of the people that are listening. So how can we change the green buyer's short-term harvest by harvest buying mentality? Aleko, this one is for you. So what is your perception on this? Because you hear a lot of things in the sector, and we are here, of course, of your model. For you, it's actually working. And I think many farmers are saying, perhaps listening or hearing about these type of models, and they want to say, where do I sign up with Aleko, for example? But how do you see this?
That's a tricky question. I think being a farmer is probably the most difficult job in the world. You have to work harder than everyone else in the first place. And it's still not entirely up to you what results you're going to get in the end. Living in our place in the coffee industry, we know our intention is to go back and work in these communities year after year. We don't put in contracts that exist longer than one growing period, whether that's a semester or 2 semesters, but never more than 12 months, but we always re-up because we want the onus to be on the producer to put the effort in. We've had instances in the past where we've had long-term contracts where the first year went really well, and then we saw a gradual decline in effort in year 2 and year 3, which is why we work the system that we work in, which is the quality has to meet the expectation. And this sounds harsh, but we're just simply not going to buy it unless the quality meets the expectation. We often bring in another buyer or work in communities where there is a buyer, like Nespresso in Colombia. It used to be Starbucks in Ethiopia in the year past, where we know we can skim the cream off of the top and that there is a fairly significant differential and premium for the rest of the quality that's going somewhere else. But that's tough, you know. The only way to really answer that positively is to say that the intention is for Red Fox to be in these communities year after year. And we have the track record of that, you know. Yeah, I guess that's.
And I think that track record, in a sense, is and that relationship, again, back to what Edie mentioned, is something that is also correlates, I think, and appreciated by every single actor of the supply chain. In that sense, and then briefly also picking up a question here from, in this case, Marcio Paz. Edie, how have you seen the development of these labels and certification? Have you seen in your segment of the market any need, any interest, or as you also mentioned, that quality angle is much more important for your customers?
I think, again, it goes back to educating your customers. People hear a label, and so then they ask for those things, and those are things that they might not know a lot about. Like, people don't know that these certifications don't mean anything about the taste in coffee, and but they will ask for certain certifications. So it's asking your customer what's important about that certification for you. So if someone asks for organic or fair trade, we're not organic roasters, but we know which of our producers are organic. So we can guide them that way, and we can tell them about the farm, which is a little bit harder because you can't talk to everybody, but the more that they're educated about the certifications and the labels, and I think it's just getting to know what roasters are out there having relationships and can tell you about their producers, then people won't rely on labels as much. Sort of, but that's on a small scale. When you're talking a big scale, I think it's a lot more impossible to do that, and that's where most people ask for labels or certifications. Did that answer that?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that depending what type of consumers it is, the need for more information on the product becomes more apparent, and then it becomes harder to put into a label, especially when it comes to the quality of coffee.
Right, and then there's different generations of our consumers want different things. You know, and our younger generation definitely wants to know a little bit more about the farmers and what's happening, and is it sustainable? And we can tell them those stories. And then our older generation, which is my generation, are more into, is it organic? Is it fair trade? Is it Rainforest Alliance, etc.? So it's getting to know your customers and how to approach them and know what's important to them.
And for you, Aleko, have you seen that trend? And then I go to you, Alex.
The trend of certification?
Yes,
Sorry.
and labeling. Yes.
I think we saw a dip in that, and we saw the emergence of direct trade happen, which I think is now fading, honestly. I like Alex's term direct contact. I think that's a little bit actually. But, you know, I think when we as a consuming community get past the ideas of certifications, we'll be in a better place, at least when it comes to the higher quality portion segments of the industry. The argument can certainly be made as fair trade being critical to the mass of the commodity coffee that's out there, and at least ensuring a baseline. I think, unfortunately, it's below the cost of production in many instances. But we're, you know, at least in our very, very, again, very tiny niche that we live in, we don't see really any onus being put on using certification from our buyers. So we stay away. Yeah.
Okay, Alex.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to a little bit of what Edie said, and I really liked the part about her talking about more about the coffees, the producers to the consumers, and how it can be more difficult for a larger brand to do that. But I want to emphasize that what she's doing and others like her are doing is very, very important. And that definitely has an effect on the whole industry. And I think helping others do that is gonna trickle down on the whole industry and have a positive impact. So I definitely am very happy to hear that you're doing that, because it's gonna help everybody understand how this works and what it needs in order to work well. So I think customers don't drink a very expensive bottle of wine every night, but every once in a while they do, and then the rest of the days they might drink a more best value wine, you know. But the idea will be in their heads, and so I think it's a very positive thing to be done.
Thank you.
What we have seen in the last years, and I think of all of you of which is that growth of specialty coffee consumption, and that growth also on the production side, be it naturals, be it honeys. Here, one of the participants, Olga, is saying, well, the answer is probably yes, paying more for specialty coffee, but what about non-specialty coffee? Are these market players who pay for this, who buy this coffee, are they willing to pay also more? And if they're not piloting this or trying this, what will then, are we then able to make a difference? And this, of course, a big chunk of the sector. Alex, for you again. So how do you see that you're in contact with a lot of producers in Guatemala? How do you see this?
It varies year to year, and I think the answer to this question very often doesn't. It's not in the hands of the producer. It's more on the hands of the industry, on the commercial side. So to tell you very frankly, it makes one feel a little bit lost sometimes, and it makes it more difficult to project. But having said that, I think there are a lot of roasters who understand what's going on, and that a lot of producers are having a difficult time making ends meet, and these try to pay a better price so that the producer can work things through. But others don't, you know, and they compare different origins and qualities, and according to that, they make their buying decisions, and there is very little dialogue there, and it's basically a numbers game there. So again, I want to emphasize how important I feel to get closer to the people that are along your chain, to explain better what you're going through, and to understand better what's going through along the rest of the chain. For many producers, this is very difficult because their geographic position or their size. But then you have to learn to organize and find a way of how to communicate better. And the same thing is happening on the producer side with labor. You know, here in Guatemala, almost everybody has a cellular now, and everybody communicates to see where the best production is, where the best conditions are, and there is an incredible level of communication going on. And whether we like it or not, I think that's going to trickle upwards in the chain as well, you know. So yeah.
Now we have a question here for you, Aleko, specifically. It comes from Clay Cass, and it asks, can you give more example what price ranges or coffee scores start to create an upward mobility for farmers?
That's a great question. Price-wise, and I feel more comfortable speaking about Colombia and Peru specifically, and of course, farmers' cost of production and total cost of goods is going to be different origin by origin. It will be different farm to farm depending on the size. There's too many variables. So speaking in the communities that I have more experience in Colombia, I think if minimum price level to a smallholder in Colombia has to be no less than $225, which doesn't sound like a great price. But when you add that up to FOB, you're getting closer to probably $250. Our minimum price to farmers there is about $240 and can get as high as $280, $290. In Peru, it's even greater. If you really want to have impact, they're in the unfortunate position of being default organic across the country. Their production is minuscule. We prefer, through our, again, junior understanding, our brand new understanding, to pay no less than $250 farm gate where we can. And again, this is why quality becomes so dependent, because now we're getting into larger price levels that we have to pay FOB and to sell at. But yeah, so for us, we're talking about cup scores that are 85, 86, if that was part of the question there, and then those price levels minimum for. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alec, for that. So then the question comes, because we're hearing about, you know, the mainstream coffee sector and then also the specific specialty coffee industry. One of the questions I received on myself, thanks, Greg, is so how can we actually expand that reach of specialty coffee in that sense? And I think I'm going to place it with Edie, because he says, you know, there are around 40,000 farmers in Nicaragua, and there are only 7 or 10 names in the coffee shops around the world. Edie, how do you see that, you know, with your experience and starting up and now opening up your 3rd coffee shop?
Can you ask that again? I don't know if I got the whole gist of it. Sorry.
So how can we expand that reach of specialty coffee?
Well, everything to me goes back to the education of the consumers. My husband's from New Zealand, lived there for 8 years. Everybody will pay a higher price. Everybody expects you to make a great cappuccino. And we need to get our consumers to expect that more. And the more that they understand coffee has flavor, they won't just come in and say, oh, I want a Nicaraguan coffee or I want a Guatemalan coffee. They will know that different regions are different, different producers are different, and they'll start asking for flavor profiles. I mean, this is like my dream. But and then from there, hopefully, you know, the way we've expanded things is you get to know a producer, they start to do well, their neighbors start to see that and ask them questions, and they start to help each other. So now the neighboring farm is also increasing in quality. And then by having roasters going down to meet people, when we go down, we meet more producers all the time. And it's not to say that we're going to purchase from them, but we know lots of roasters, and we refer other roasters to go to certain places and meet certain farmers also. So I think the connecting of all of us roasters with our importers and with producers will help people get more relationships. I think a lot of roasters value that relationship and want to create them, and they just don't know how. But it's kind of like anything, it's networking and getting to know people and introducing each other. And I think that would help. So if someone wanted to know more about Nicaraguan coffees and different producers, we can do that through our importers or through the relationships we already have. And then that would increase the amount of producers you'll see in coffee houses.
Okay. Going back to the farming of coffee, one of the questions that is popping up is from Brandon, and he relates to the study, Alex, in that sense. He says, you know, for us, our farms have a high productivity and high profitability for them and their farmers, which is a bit of a contrary, he says, you know, what we see. And he says, you know, it depends on, of course, how this productivity is achieved and how is this shared. Questions particularly is, how do we find the sweet spot of productivity and profitability? That is for you, Alex.
You have to validate models. Our farm used to be planted mostly with caturras, with catuais, and other rust susceptible varieties. And since we were working, or we are working organically, we had to go through a lot of thought about whether to continue with those varietals or replant with new varietals or change our agronomical practices. So we had many sleepless nights about that. And what we decided is to replant large portion of the farm with rust-resistant varieties. And we did not have experience with these varieties as to their productivity, their fertilization, and their best planting distances, things like that. So we planted about 20 different varietals. Maybe 75% of them we like. About 3 of them we really like, and about 3 or 4 of them we really don't like, and we're going to discard them. So we're doing a lot of data taking in regard to what they're producing and about what their cup score is. And so we started replanting about 3 years ago, and until now is that we're starting to see the first productions coming about. So but to get good and accurate data, you need more years to see what the behavior and the cup potential is going to be. So on the whole, we're very happy that we replanted with these new varieties, but I do advise to start slowly, because each farm, each condition is different. Just in Guatemala, there are areas where it rains 6 meters per year. In our particular area, it rains maybe 1.5 meters per year, so the conditions are completely different, and you have to make changes accordingly to each region. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but yeah.
It goes to show that when it comes to farming, it definitely is correlated also, and the way how you farm depends also what type of variety you have also on your farm. I think that is something what we have seen often.
Yes. But on the whole, we're opening our distances amongst coffee trees. We're adding more shade. We're also irrigating, installing irrigation in many parts of the farm where we have water easily available. This will speed the production time and also help us ensure a more stable and better size harvest. And many of our micronutrients, compost teas, we're applying through the irrigation now. This, having done this, we're very happy. But I think we'll be able to get more accurate data until the 4th year of production, where we see that the plants are starting to mature and give us the more accurate production data.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. So we're at the end of our webinar. Thank you so much for your participation in this dialogue that we are trying to create. I'm just going to finish off with a question for Aleko and for Edie. And I know, Kim, we need to run off. Do you think that by 2020 we have less farmers engaging coffee? Aleko?
No question about it. I mean, climate change alone is going to wipe out a certain significant percentage of coffee farmers between now and then, even in just 2 years. I think unless there is some real stimulus on the financial front, unless there's incentive for coffee farmers, we'll see not just farms start to fail, but these generations start to leave. So my short answer is yeah, definitely less production.
Thank you, Aleko. Edie?
I think Aleko knows more about it than me. I choose to hope that we don't lose farmers and that the new generation in there sees how producing quality coffee will help them in their communities, and that we're going to do our best on this side to get our consumers to understand it so we don't lose coffee and we don't lose producers. But yeah, I'm just going to be on the ever hopeful side.
Yeah, let's indeed. With the models that you guys are, each of you are putting your effort in this industry, and also giving examples how it can actually work from a producing angle, also all the way from buying and selling of coffee. So thank you so much for your participation. Kim, Elena, it's 11 on the dot.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank you all for participating in this and close out the webinar, and thank everyone who's on the line. As many of you know, now we hit our limit on registrants. It was we should have anticipated this perhaps, and so I've got about 14 questions from this group that, or from this group of participants that we didn't get to here on the panel. So I will, I've made notes of all of those, and I'll circulate those to this group. Those 14 questions, and we've also got a couple dozen people exactly who, or at least who weren't able to join us on this webinar. So I think that definitely speaks to the relevance of this topic and the desire for further conversations. This webinar, the recording will be made available, and as I said, I'll seek answers to the questions that we didn't get to here in this hour, and share those with all of the attendees as well by email. So. Once again, reiterating just the beginning, thank you, Edie, Aleko, Alex, and especially you, Vera. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.